Okay, now we're basically going to begin the process of texturing the interior aspect of our chopper. Currently, I have a Photoshop document open, which is basically a file, or I should say a Photoshop document that utilizes a lot of the same or previously used textures from the exterior hull, but in a more generic form. In this document, we basically have a series of grunge maps, as well as a series of layer adjustments, and a couple other masking channels and features. For the most part, it's just composed of a base color and a series of grime or grunge maps that are going to be overlaid on top of it. Now, I'm basically editing my layers here so that I can, maintain the workflow that I'm going to be creating when I do these textures. So the first thing I'm going to do is pretty much open up the individual textures that we're going to begin with. I think in this case the main communications console will be a good start. And once we open up that file, we'll begin by setting up the various layers and channels so that we can begin the process of laying out the way the textures are supposed to look. So right now I'm going to open up the AO map or AO pass of that particular object and use that as my guide and base as to where a certain texture should go overall. And as we see here, we have a fairly decent AO map. It's a bit on the gray side, so I'm going to probably adjust the contrast on that. But I'm going to first resize it using one of my action scripts here, which is make 8K, so that the actual AO map itself can be used in our 8K textured document. And I'm going to select, using an alpha channel, the actual contents of the AO map itself. I'm just going to basically drag and drop those right on top of my main communications PSD here. And now I'm going to basically go in and check it to see if it works the way I want. I'm going to do a desaturation to get rid of any kind of color values. And I'm going to basically perform an auto contrast as well, so that we'll get some stronger whites and deeper blacks in here, as you can see. And just going to multiply that over the background base color. Now that we have this AO pass set up, we can now use it as a masking feature to create other effects in our document. And I think also that now that we have this also picked, I'm going to probably go in and mask out the negative space of our document with black. So I'm just going to go in here and just simply, in our masking channel of this particular layer, just delete out the contents that are not supposed to be visible. I mean, they are supposed to be visible from the mask itself. So here we have a black mask going around all the contents of our communication console here. And just simply going around inspecting the various maps, checking out to see how they're coming together even in this early stage. And as you can see here, just the subtle variations of color these grunge maps add basically neutralize any saturation or values that basically may be too much for this interior cockpit. So right now what I'm going to do now is just go in and basically try to only isolate the grunge map to occupy the areas where dirt would naturally accumulate on a surface like this. It is still somewhat analog as far as it has keys attached to keyboards and such, but for the most part it's supposed to be a futuristic digital type of interface. So I'm going to perform another desaturation over the AO pass, another color adjustment on my duplicate here, and I'm going to use that as an alpha in which to later select and highlight the various parts of the surface that I want to use in my occlusion and or grunge maps. So as you can see, once it's turned into an alpha, I can simply go and load it up, and we'll basically pick the gradation of values in that image. And what I'm going to do now is alter the selection parameters of the actual group that we have masked out right now. And by performing a couple contractions and feathers, basically I'm going to go in and delete from the grunge map all the parts that I do not want to have, any kind of grunge. And as you can see, the areas of our AO map that were dark are basically the parts that now have the grunge on them, and the parts that were white are now just plain surfaces with the main color bleeding through, and that we can now alter and change as we see fit. So it's just a quick way to give some detail and some visual interest and just history to these surfaces without being too overpowering by using a pure straight AO map that sometimes can be a bit, CG looking and can sometimes detract from what you're trying to do. But having this more subtle approach to it basically allows you to get away with the same effect, but by making it more of a texture-based application, or usage, I should say. So here we are back in Maya, basically tumbling around the model. And what we're going to do is just take a look at the UVs and distribution of where these actual screens on our communication console lie, so that when we go back into Photoshop, we know exactly where we're going to be applying our maps. And right now I'm just picking the edges just to know which side belongs to what in the actual viewport, so I know right from left and up from down. So when I go back into Photoshop and start creating my texture, I know exactly where it's supposed to lay and go. So now we're back in Photoshop. What we're going to do is basically begin working on the actual screens themselves. But we're going to first mask out the actual frame or armature of the screen and give it I guess a darker tone than the actual background, which appears to be more neutral than I want. So I'm going to add an actual color to this that separates it from the rest of the instrumentation. So I'm getting all my selections here correct before I go in and make this, a darker, probably shade of gray or something towards black. And I'm just looking to make sure that I have all the components that make up that screen highlighted. So I'll go back into Photoshop here. And it looks pretty consistent to what I've seen in Maya. So what I'm going to do now is just create a nice little fill color. So let's see here. I'm going to scroll down and use the base here. And just going to make this a darker gray. And it looks okay. I may go a little darker depending on the overall look here. I'm still seeing a lot of the base coming through, which is not a bad thing, but I want to hide it a little bit more so that we see a little more contrast in our values here. So that looks about what I want roughly. So let's see, we can tweak this just a tad more. Let's see here. Just don't want to do anything too extreme. And now I'm going to basically to be in our screen process. So I'm going to select the screens that we're going to use. And I'm basically going to start the process of creating a series of layer styles that represent, this glowing digital display. So once we have, the main geometry, at least the version of it laid out here in our Photoshop document, highlighted, I'm going to begin, setting up the various color passes that it needs to create it. So as you can see, I'm creating a red base color for our screens, which will serve the purpose of, establishing a tone and pattern that we're going to be using. And I'm also going to multiply a similar shape on top of it in which to basically create our layer styles. And I'm not sure if you noticed this or not, but over the course of texturing various components of this particular vehicle, I've utilized, a white layer multiplied above a base color in order to create layer effects that are independent of the actual color beneath it. So that way I can tweak it and alter it separately from the color itself. So as you can see right now, all I do is add an inner glow, and basically I'm increasing the choke and size of those particular elements inside the inner glow to create what appears to be glowing edges of an LCD type display or infrared type of plasma display. And I'm basically adding some contours to change the overall profile of the glow itself, so that it's something a little more refined and not so generic. But overall, it's just, again, a simple little border to basically identify this area as something different than just being, a wall or a piece of metal or something. It actually has a purpose and serves a form. So right now, I'm going to go in and begin the process of setting up our brushes here. I came across a wonderful set of brushes by a wonderful artist on the DeviantArt website, whose name and information I'll give at the end of this DVD. But with his permission, of course, and credit, I'm able to use these brushes free of charge to basically create a user interface of sorts for our display. Now, I can go through the trouble of making a really awesome, user interface, but for the most part, no one will ever see that. So since that's the case, basically, I'm going to give just enough of a representation to identify it as a screen in the background, but nothing more. I mean, again, we're working under, in this case, a artificial time constraint, but a time constraint nonetheless. And in most production environments, you won't have unlimited time to create various things. So you take shortcuts where you can, and try to get the look that you're trying to, you want to accomplish in as easy and as efficient a manner as possible. So right now what I'm doing is setting up, these various, interface style brushes, and I'm just going to simply begin painting and laying them out until I get an actual look that I think is pretty cool and that I like. So here I am, just, picking random brushes and hopefully laying them out in a way that looks kind of cool and high-techish and somewhat, descriptive of, some kind of, military operation or unit or something. So it's just a matter of composing these various shapes in a unique way so that, they read as an actual display. And I would recommend also in your own time developing your own custom set of brushes similar to these for the purpose of any kind of applications like this. And it's good to have them on hand at all times so that if a project arises where you need to access these brushes, you have them on file in the library or what have you. So I'm just going through and just isolating, the ones that I think look cool or I think may contribute to the overall layout and design, and just placing them on there and see what they look like. I mean, after all, it's just, a brush. I can go and erase it if I want. It's not permanent or set in stone. And for the most part, it's just giving us some visual interest so that if our eye or the camera ever glances past these objects, it's something just there to, occupy and aesthetically fill the space that otherwise would be just empty and somewhat monotonous. So again, just going through, picking out brushes and making sure that we compose this in a way that, is cool. It's just all about making it look good and making it work for what it is. Even though it's something that's in the background that won't be prominently featured at all, we're still putting a little time into laying it out just in case the camera does glimpse it for a second or so. It at least have something of interest to focus on, or just go past, and it'll just help blend the world in and make it a little bit more just concrete and established as opposed to just being the stagnant and CG-esque environment kind of thing. So just going through again, trying to see what other brushes I can use to add in there, and it's just really mixing and matching various ones. Ultimately, I think I'm going to add some graphics in here as well. So I'm leaving some negative space on purpose to basically fill up later with other graphical elements. So here we have a brush that basically represents some kind of text. Doesn't say anything really. It's just a visual, cue. So we're just going to add that in there. And just going to add these in various places. some type of instructional information or what have you on this virtual user interface. I'm looking for some more brushes here. Another thing, since these particular textures that we're creating right now for the user interface of this particular console design are not permanent in the sense that the art director didn't really direct me on how to create or make this particular look. This is all coming from just me on the fly here, putting something down. Now ultimately I'll run it past him to get his perspective, and if he wants any changes to be done, I easily can come in here, and implement them into the actual layers I have created so far. And for the most part, I mean, these can just serve as placement holders, or as I'm using them, as just background textures that really serve no purpose other than just filling up the space with something really cool and visually interesting. So again, depending on your project and how your workflow is established, you can go about doing the very same things. So right now I'm going into Google to do some quick searches for some royalty-free images of basically just terrain, some generic map environment that I can just use as a way to indicate that this chopper is en route to some top secret facility or something. So I'm looking for something a little mountainous, something that indicates that there's a lot of structure that could be hidden in that given area, and it doesn't really seem to have too much of a population, if anything, near it at all. It's like something probably in the Himalayas or some remote mountain chain in the world, and for the most part, the enemies of our main protagonist chose this facility or this location for the purpose of being completely hidden and unexposed to any kind of hostile threats that they may incur with their work. So I'm just browsing through here looking for an image, but luckily with the movie magic here, I'm going to cut back to one of the maps that I found. Which basically is an island that I cut out, and I'm going to basically continue to alter and change to what I need it for. So right now I'm just scaling it down so that it fits within the periphery of our main screen. I don't want to scale it down too much because I want to lose all the detail that is naturally occurring in this particular map. But what we will do is basically, emphasize, regions of it, using our pseudo virtual interface here as a window of sorts into that world, and establishing, the nature of why this particular location is so important. So if you look right now, you'll see me tweaking the actual color of the image that I brought in so that it's in line or within the same color range as our surrounding interface. And I'm just going to go back and begin creating some secondary brush details so that we can tie this landmass into the interface a little more directly. Right now I'm going to move on to the other interface. It's basically the keyboard. So we're just going around here. Basically I just selected all my keys. I'm going to basically do the same thing I did to the screens, to them, because in a way I'm imagining these keys as not just being straight analog keys or some type of micro display setup or system. So in these keys basically they're going to be somewhat backlit, but they're going to be digital in nature so that whoever the user or operator on them basically can customize and change the keys as they see fit, or some keys basically can isolate themselves and change themselves in theory to basically coincide with a specific action in the targets on the display. So here we have our main keyboard, or I should say our secondary keyboard, because it doesn't have as many keys as the one right beneath it. And all I'm going to do is begin typing out the actual letters from a keyboard, in the exact order that they appear, minus a few of the symbols that we have on our keyboard. I'm going to probably combine those with each other to save space since I don't have as many keys as a normal keyboard. But at the same time, I can go in there and make something unique and cool also. So again, there's much freedom in how to interpret this at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just begin by typing in basically a cool type of font. I'm using an agency FB font that comes standard with Photoshop, and I'm just using that to basically create the overall look of our keys here. So I'm just going to type those out in the order that they appear and take it from there. So here we are going back into Maya. I'm going to basically begin inspecting the geometry and see what groupings exist as far as objects are concerned. These pieces pretty much fall in line with the communications base itself and the various pieces of hardware that correspond with it. And if you look at it, for the most part, they tend to go together with each other as far as on their UV layout, but occasionally you may have to add a piece after the fact depending on how many little individual assets you have to accomplish that given texture. So we're just going in here and making sure everything that we want to be a part of that particular texture is highlighted. So just going through and making sure I have everything that we need for our texture. Okay, looks about right to me. Maybe add a few more pieces to it. And this is what we see in the UV layout. And basically we're going to just perform a quick UV snapshot of those pieces of hardware. Now the reason I went about it this way is so that when I take it back into Photoshop, I'll know exactly where these pieces of hardware lie on my UV layout. So again, using the same technique as before, I'm making it 8K, but this time when we mask out that section, it's for the purpose of identifying, what the hardware actually is and where it's going to exist in 3D space. So all those objects that were picked coincide with this map, but I'm specifically going to apply special treatment to them to manipulate them in a way to be as beneficial to me as I need them to be. So here I'm simply going in and changing the color of these pieces from that neutral type of military, drab green or gray, and making it a little bit more, exaggerated as far as it not being as vibrant in color, but hopefully make up it and for it in its texture itself. So here we go. It's inspecting the actual verts here and UVs, and okay, looks about right. I'm now going through to add additional objects to their own specific section of the map. So just going around here looking for what other parts can be included in that session. Grab these guys over here. Maybe a few of these wires would work as well. Just pick them at random. And for the most part, these wires, I'll probably do them in multiple colors depending on what the art director tells me. But here we go. Just making sure we have it covered. Cool. Okay, zooming into some of these wires here. Make sure I grab all the pieces that I want to be included in this particular selection. Okay, that looks about right. Don't see any new little real offerings to speak of, but here we go. It's gonna basically fix that name. Save out the UVs for that and repeat that same process again, opening up those particular UVs, making them AK, and adding them to the actual texture document that I'm working on right now. Just applying some various layer effects, making sure data is being transferred the way it's supposed to be and not, you know, in just some indifferent fashion. So here we go. Okay. That looks about right. I'm just going through my layers here, renaming them, and for the most part, reorganizing them for purposes of making sure that later on when I cross a particular hurdle or something, that I'll know exactly where to go in my map in order to address that problem, as opposed to painting individually those things and not knowing exactly what to expect overall. So the timing and setting up of the shaders in relationship to that are very important. So here we go. Okay. I think we are approaching pretty much the end of this section. The only thing left now to do is to take care of these miscellaneous pieces and adding them to their list of plans. Okay. Making sure to just have all the objects that I want to be in this particular selection grouping or selection set, so that when we make our snapshot and go back into Photoshop, we can tweak the color values and everything independent of the physical building it's inside of. Not to mention the fact that, some works of art are simply copyright and are not to be touched or altered in any way. So most of these textures I either had on my own that I photographed, or a camera here. 1 second. Okay. I'm basically going to do this UV snapshot really quick and take it into Photoshop so that we can isolate these objects in the map with their own unique color and section. And then we should be ready to start displaying some of these textures inside the interior, so that the overall idea that, of what it's supposed to look like, the direction it's going aesthetically, can be conveyed easier than just me talking about them. So once these are, set up properly, we all can look at the textures themselves inside of, Maya, and actually also body paint as well, depending on what Maya can't display. And I'm just tweaking the color values for those objects. Okay. Okay. I see here. Okay, so yeah, we have now the neutral green, neutral gray, and now this neutral type of bluish tint, or color, I should say. So, yes, making sure our objects are properly highlighted. Okay, I'm just switching these highlights right now. Let me see. Okay, just isolate view selected on these wires, and we're going to just pick random combinations of wires to basically attribute or assign a given color to. So once we've basically done this about 2 or 3 times, 4 maybe, we'll know exactly how to balance the colors and everything to work outright once GL and the shot are set up properly and the latter gets his hand on it. He has some visual interest in which to either focus on or utilize for his own mapping purposes. So here we go. That looks cool. What did you say? Here is, I say red. Okay. We now have some red sets of wires. Basically gonna add, see what color next we can put in there. Maybe we'll add some white wires also. We also have some black wiring as well. If you're not, well, I wouldn't quite say black, more like a dark gray slate color. But anyway, you just finish off your selection of wires with the various colors you want, and pretty much save out your texture, and once you're done, you can begin loading them up into your individual scene as I have here, and just begin to assign the individual textures to it. And with the help of some editing, we pretty much have all our textures, for the most part, for this interior chopper, assigned and ready to go as far as, finishing off any miscellaneous pieces that may have gotten overlooked. But overall, to establish that, this is the direction of the various looks that we have, and hopefully it works out to be something really cool and awesome. I hope you enjoyed this particular lesson, and I hope you look forward to what there is in store coming up next.